Reaper may be extremely inexpensive and free of a lot of the corporate stuff that a lot of the bigger DAWs are associated with, but is it good for electronic music? Yes. And that's what I want to show in today's video, why it's good for electronic music. And now notice I didn't say the best for electronic music, because that's debatable, and even by those standards, Reaper is probably not the absolute best for electronic music. That might go to Ableton or Bitwig or something like that, but Reaper is definitely great for it. I should also mention that this is not going to be an in-depth tutorial. I did a dedicated video showing you how to make your first song in Reaper that'll link at the end of this video. But let's get into it. The biggest thing in my mind that makes Reaper good for electronic music production is how flexible it is, and how surprisingly flexible it is. So let me create a new track, and you have a few options. You have the ability to insert a new track, for instance, or insert a virtual instrument on new track. That's pretty standard so far, and if you do that, it'll give you a big list of all of your virtual instruments. But you don't have to do that. Let me just start a new track. Completely blank. It doesn't contain anything. It's just kind of dumb and sitting here. So I could record audio into this like a standard DAW, or I could go to my effects and I can add a virtual instrument as an effect, and it will just recognize it and work right off the bat. So let me add Vital. I'm going to get into Vital in a second, because this is a free plugin that is ridiculously powerful and makes Reaper better. So now I have Vital loaded in. That's working. And if I create a MIDI item, it works. Completely hassle-free, which is super nice. And I could load on another instrument plugin if I want to. Let's do another instance of Vital and pull up just a random preset. Now, you can hear both presets work at once. So there's that really shimmery preset, and then here's just the default saw wave. Those are both working together flawlessly. No hassle. All I had to do was just add it, and it knew what to do with it. And now I can just add effects on top of it. And let me just bring this attack down so it's a little more easy to hear what's going on. So add, let's just do something obvious like a distortion. Or add some bit crush. Doesn't sound great, but hopefully you get the idea. And if I want to take this whole stacking plugins on one track thing even further, I can add something like Scalar 2 by Plugin Boutique at the very beginning of the chain. And now this is a MIDI effect, and normally you'd have to do some kind of creative routing to get this to work. But it just feeds this plugin into the next plugin, into the next plugin. Once again, it just freaking works. So for instance, I could pull up some chords, and I could program MIDI notes in to trigger each of these chords, and it will work completely flawlessly, absolutely no setup required. That's super powerful for any DAW, and especially for electronic music, where often you do want to have different things feeding into each other. This makes that really easy. You can take this even further with plugins that are multi-channel. So let's get into, very briefly, a tangent about plugins that you can bring in to make Reaper better. Because one of Reaper's weakest aspects is the fact that it just doesn't really have any good virtual instruments or synthesizers built in. It's got like a basic sampler and such, but you can do better. So let's add a new virtual instrument on a new track. Let me scroll into my favorites folder, which it does have, which is also nice. And let's grab this plugin by Decomposer. This is a free drum sampler plugin, and it automatically asks me, do I want to just do the routing for me? So in this case, I'm going to hit yes. If I click no, it'll just make it a single track. But if I click yes, it will make these separate drums all separate tracks. So let me select the kick and look for it here. So basically what I can end up doing, let me create a new MIDI item. Create a kick. Just something super basic. So all this MIDI is living on this main track, but all of these individual tracks are getting triggered by it. Once again, it just set it up for me. Super handy for electronic music production. And now I can process all of these individual drums individually, but still have them only be controlled by one track. So I can do all of my drum programming in one piano roll, and don't worry, we'll get into the piano roll. But I can do my processing separately. Volumes, effects. So let me just add, say, a distortion to this kick. Just make it really annoying and obvious, and maybe add, say, a pitch shifter to the snare. And you can hear those individual sounds being affected individually. But I hear you say, what if I want to process all the drums at once as well? This is where folders come in, and this is where the extreme flexibility of tracks goes even further. So if I create a new blank track and drag it to the top here, I can click this little folder icon, and it will automatically add plugins below it into a folder. This means that any processing I apply to this track will apply to all of the tracks contained within it. It's a kind of a novel take on grouping tracks together. And I can also just kick tracks out of it as well. So now this rim shot, say, is no longer part of this group. But helpfully, let me draw in a note to demonstrate this. This rim shot right here is still getting triggered by this MIDI despite not being in this overarching folder. So now let me add some effects to this folder. Let me just reverb the absolute hell out of it. You hear how the rim shot still is completely dry. No reverb on it at all. That's getting a bit into the weeds, but once again, it's just to show you the extreme flexibility of the track structure of Reaper, and that does genuinely make it good for electronic music in a way that I wouldn't have seen in something like Logic, which is a little bit more rigid. It might be better now, it's been a while since I've used it, but hopefully you get the idea. That's just one electronic music producer-friendly aspect of Reaper, though. Next, let's get into the piano roll, and this is something that at first felt like a downgrade from what I was used to in Logic, and then once I got used to it, is virtually indistinguishable. So, by default, you have this pencil icon. All you have to do to draw on a note is draw on a note. You can grab notes using this window by holding down right click, and you can adjust the velocity fairly directly, which is cool. Or you've got access to your velocity down here as well, all on one screen. And you've got all of these other parameters that you can adjust within your piano roll all on one screen as well. So things like your pitch wheel can go in here, and all of the stuff that you might need for, say, some 5D MIDI as well if you own, say, an Artifon Orba or a Relay Light Block, for instance. That's all in here. If you hold down Shift, you can move stuff off the grid, or you can keep stuff on the grid. All of that stuff is in here as well. And you may have noticed on that drums plugin that I showed you earlier, reminder, it's free, it actually labeled the samples on the piano roll as well. And you could even view this as little nodes rather than notes. So if that makes it easier for you to visualize the drums that you're programming, you can just do that, which is pretty sweet. And of course, there's standard stuff like zooming in and out. You can use your mouse wheel to scroll in and out horizontally, or hold down Control and use your mouse wheel to scroll in and out vertically, or hold down your mouse wheel to kind of like grab it and pan around. And of course, you've got your super nice little sliders here for doing basically the same thing. Super intuitive to use. The piano roll is one of those things that I can just jump into and very intuitively just doodle out a melody or chord progression or something without even connecting a MIDI keyboard if I don't happen to have one on hand, if I'm in a cafe on a lunch break or something. All very nice to have. Real quick, I do want to give a huge shout out to the synth plugin Vital. This plugin is cross-platform and it is completely free. And in that way, it's basically the serum killer. It is a really in-depth synth with a lot of fantastic abilities, very versatile, super in-depth, but also a visual interface, which is always a great combination. I highly recommend getting this and that drums plugin I shouted out if you get Reaper. That will greatly expand its capabilities. And working with plugins is pretty straightforward. You can tell it which folders to scan for once you've downloaded a plugin, and then it'll just know about it. Because if you're unfamiliar, a plugin is something you get from a third party. Like, there will be built-in plugins that come with your DAW, and Reaper has quite a few of those. I use the built-in EQ all the time. The pitch adjustment plugin is pretty good. It even has formant shifting, which is a lot of fun. And it's pretty bare bones, but it is here. There's even an auto-tune plugin in Reaper that gives usable-ish results. And you can make up for its deficiencies in the virtual instrument department by downloading plugins, and it's pretty easy to bring them in yourself. Same with effects. I've got a lot of creative effects I like using as well. But let's move on and talk about another topic that's very important for electronic music production, and that is automation, which Reaper handles really well. So in this case, I've got this little glitchy drum loop, which I made by stacking a ton of plugins on top of each other, rendering that result out, and then stacking even more plugins to process it even further. And let's say, just for the sake of example, that I want to automate the pitch of it over time. Like that. In order to do that, all I have to do is grab the parameter that I want to automate, wiggle it around a little bit, and then go to trim here, which is where your automation stuff lives. This looks super intimidating, right? This is every parameter you could possibly automate. But I'm going to check the box that says show last touched effects parameters only. There's my pitch shift right there. And then I can create some nodes by holding down shift and then clicking. And then I could have this descend in pitch, for instance. And that's not even close to all the stuff you can do. I can reset that point, for instance. I could also use my right click and drag to select both of these points and then set the shape for selected points. So for instance, I could select fast start and you get a logarithmic curve. Like that, which is very useful. Or I could select fast end, which will give me an exponential shape. Sounds pretty weird in this example, but hopefully you get the idea. This especially comes in clutch if I can't be bothered to route sidechaining stuff. For instance, I've got this bass line and this kick. So let's say that I want to fake sidechaining by doing some volume automation. That is surprisingly easy. All I have to do is add a volume adjustment plugin. I do this separately from the main volume fader because I want them to act independently. So I put this to 0, so that was me touching that parameter. Let me go to trim, grab that. Let me change my snap settings. So now I'm seeing a more zoomed in grid, create a couple of points. I know this seems a little tedious, but once you get into it, it's really not bad. And then I want to select both of these points by holding down shift, right click. I want fast end. That's kind of the standard shape you'd want to see for sidechaining. So where's my other kick? My other kick is here. So now I can just grab this whole bit of automation, copy it, and paste it. It's that easy. So hopefully you're starting to see how powerful this can be. Like that. And now I can grab all of this automation and copy it over to the next time it loops, for instance. And all of that is super straightforward. And you can use this for super momentary changes like I've shown here, or very slow evolution over time. There's even the option to modulate a parameter. So you get either audio control, so you can do some sidechaining with that, or you can even work with LFOs, and you've got some settings to work with here. So in this case, I've got a sine wave modulating my frequency cutoff for my EQ, which sounds like this. Turn that off. Turn it on. And you can tempo sync it. You've got multiple different shapes to choose from. It's a square wave. And you can take this pretty far with quite a few plugins. Really cool to see that in here. I should be clear. Many other DAWs can do this stuff, and some of them even do it better. This is not unique to Reaper, and it doesn't mean Reaper is the best. But when I first switched to Reaper, I was wondering, am I making a mistake here, or is this going to work out for electronic music production? And it turned out to work out really well. This is the video I wish I had when I was first making the switch, just to confirm, yes, this is a good call. There are some definite benefits here. Anyway, if you'd like to see a more in-depth Reaper tutorial, you can click or tap up over here. And if you'd like to see a deep dive into Vital, the free synth that I highly recommend, you can click or tap up over here. And I've got a couple more videos on how I use Reaper for some other more creative purposes, working with hardware synths and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching.